All right, Bokeh Podcast listeners, we are back for another brand new episode with a brand new guest. Amanda Stevens is here. Thank you for hanging out with me today, Amanda.
Thank you for having me.
And as everybody, well, I hope you have at least an idea. If you're listening to the Bokeh Podcast, we are about helping photographers build sustainable businesses. Now, a lot of the conversation centers around workflow because of that, but we also occasionally get to dig into the technical side of photography. Amanda's going to help us with kind of an intro to off-camera flash today, and we're going to get to that in just a little bit. But before we do, I want to touch on some of these questions that I normally ask our guests here on the show, Amanda. First of all, just to give a little bit of context to our listeners, whereabouts are you currently based?
I am mainly based in New York City.
Okay. And I know that you mentioned to me, we were even talking about this before we started recording, that you photograph at the Empire State Building. And we'll give a little bit of context to that in just a little bit. But in that New York market, first of all, customer experience, how have you found most effective in your experience as a photography business owner, creating a better customer experience, creating one of those experiences that your customers are just going to go home and tell their friends, their family about, because they were just like, oh my word, Amanda was amazing. What is that thing that you're doing to create that kind of experience for them? I
have a relatively unique background where I grew up in a retail setting. Okay. My mother has a children's toy store. So I started working as soon as I could talk to people for the most part.
Really? Okay.
So I grew up very customer service trained and based. And then I worked for Apple Retail for about a year and a half. And our training was solely customer service and nothing on products. So just learning from that and just keeping it a positive experience.
Well, so let's make it practical, though. I mean, it's interesting. Sure. You mentioned that Apple, you said it's nothing about products. It's all about customer experience, despite the fact that Apple is ultimately selling a variety of products, right?
Well, basically, they figure you're going to be around these products 20 to 40 hours a week. Yeah. You're going to learn them regardless. So we'd rather you know how to talk to people and talk to customers and problem solve than technical aspects.
Which makes a lot of sense. So what does that actually look like tangibly, though? Like what kind of feedback or advice would they give you saying, hey, you're about to have a conversation with this customer. I want you to do this, this, and this, or this is the kind of experience that I want you to create, or this is the mood, the mentality that I want you to exude as you're going into that conversation. What did it sound like?
So the number one thing was don't make anything up. If you don't know, it's fine, but just don't make anything up.
Really? Okay.
The phrasing that they wanted us to use was, I don't know, let's find out. So making it a team effort on learning whatever the answer to question to the customer or client.
That's really cool. Okay.
Yeah.
And did they explain the thought process behind that?
It's been 10 years, but I think Apple based all of its customer service training off of the Waldorf company.
Interesting.
If I remember correctly.
Okay.
So it was just more of, nobody at Apple is on commission, which was awesome at times. And then when your top sales was terrible. But the cool thing about working, again, it plays into photography as well. But my strong point is obviously photo and editing software and that kind of thing. But we had musicians, we had a scuba diver want to learn how to use their computer, like just people from all walks of life. So I'm obviously not going to know the answers to, Logic Pro or anything on sound,
right?
But I wasn't expected to. So I knew I had coworkers that I could fall back on to answer the questions that I couldn't. And it was better than making anything up.
That's great, though. This is a really interesting perspective. Certainly, I've never gotten an answer like this before on the show. And I think it's a great reminder. It seems basic, but honesty should always be priority, number one. And there's a certain amount of vulnerability there, which creates, it's the basis of a friendship, the beginnings of a friendship, right? When you're willing to say,
it makes you more human too.
Yes. Yeah. That's a much better way to put it, actually. That's really, really good. And then, as you pointed out, you said, let's figure this out together. It becomes a team effort. And now you're encouraging the notion of community and togetherness, working together, which is also a good reminder and a good lesson when it comes to customer experience. So that's really cool. I really appreciate that perspective. I want to keep going, though, because you're in a busy market in New York City.
Not at the moment, but yeah.
Well, fair. Most of the time, yes. Just to give a little bit of context for anybody that might be listening to this later on, we are in the middle of, COVID, the COVID-19 coronavirus, and many of us are kind of stuck at home. And we're hoping that this passes over, obviously, as quickly as possible. But that means a lot of businesses are shut down largely. And nonetheless, that is still a big, busy market that you're in. And so the question that I don't know, it seems quite natural in that context is, how do you stand out amidst those photographers? We talk a lot about brand position here on the podcast. What is your brand position, or do you have a brand position there in that busy market?
I don't know if I necessarily have a brand position. Anybody with practice can take a great picture. I would like to think my clients keep coming back to me for my personality and the experience that I deliver as well. I mean, I'm very thankful that I have repeat clients and the names that I do have. But yeah, I've developed a style which is relatively colorful and just customer service based.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like that is your strength. And by the way, for anybody curious, if you want to see the so-called colorful style, and it is, firethecanon.com is the website, unique URL as well. But, you know, it's interesting. It's just a point of consideration. I just want to put this out there for everybody. The idea of getting referrals because of a great experience is incredible. In fact, a lot of my business was based, as a photographer, was based around that very idea, whether it was getting a referral from an existing client or previous client, or it was getting a referral from a coordinator who we had the wonderful opportunity to work with on an ongoing basis. But they were able to do that because they knew about us. And again, just to give context to the idea of a brand position and the significance of it, if somebody lands on your website, Amanda, or anybody that's listening in, and they have 2 or 3 or 5 seconds to know what you stand for and whether or not that fits what they're looking for, then at that point, the referral plays a very small role, or if any, in their decision-making process. And that's where the value of the brand position comes in, and why I highlight it so much here. You're in a lucky position that you've already gotten your business started. You have this momentum, and I think a lot of photographers probably are running on a very similar momentum. So I totally get where you're coming from. But for anybody listening in, especially if you're getting your business started, or you're like, you know what, I'm not booking enough. If you want to stand out, get the attention of more potential clients, a brand position, a clear and distinct brand position statement is a great place to start. And by the way, just to define that, it is the unique value proposition your business offers to the market. So just want to throw that in there. I know we talk about it a lot here on the podcast, but it's really important. And I've noticed that a lot of photographers don't have one. Again, especially if you're new, if you don't have that momentum from referrals going already, a great brand position statement will be helpful. But let's keep going. Let's talk about time. I know we have a lot of it right this minute, but what is something, Amanda, that you do when you are busy, when you're photographing regularly, to create a little bit of space for yourself or the important people in your life?
I mentioned earlier, I have a dog, so that definitely helps break up my day with having to take her out for a walk. And especially when it's nice out, it's a nice escape to get out and walk around the neighborhood. But I also go to the gym a lot. I know we're similar there, but I do a lot of classes. So I like doing boxing classes, which help take out some frustrations, and spin just to get like the cardio going. Okay.
And do you have, is that something you do on a daily basis, or in the morning, first thing, later in the day? What's that schedule look like?
I try. I am so not a morning person. So most of the time my gym, I'm lucky. My gym is pretty consistent with classes. So they do at least 1 or 2 afternoon classes around 12 o'clock. And then they do evening classes, which is what I like to do. I like to do the 6:30, 7:30 p.m. classes.
So kind of mixing it up a little bit. At the end of the day, for you, do you see the biggest difference if you're just showing up, period, versus going at a particular time of the day? Because I know for me, I'll do it in the morning, the workout in the morning, and that really helps me kind of kick off the day. It raises the energy levels. And it also minimizes the chance that I don't actually get it done later on in the day, because I kind of know my tendency. But for you, is it just a matter of showing up consistently regardless of the time?
Yeah, I've done some 7 a.m. spin classes, and I find myself just wanting to go back to bed afterwards. So
fair.
For me, that's not super productive.
Sure.
I like getting work done throughout. A lot of these shoots that I do are midday, Monday through Friday, if they're not weddings. If they're corporate, because I follow either corporate schedules or like evening parties. But for the most part, I'm working midday, and I'm weird. I like shooting broad daylight, which is where flash comes in. But so I like getting it done at the evening, knowing that I've done work during the day.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, during the day, so then you get to kind of
it's almost like a reward that I've finished work and I can now work out and work on myself.
Yeah, throw off some steam, have some space, some time for yourself. I think it's great. And I mean, the time is I don't know, seemingly insignificant as the time might be to some. For others, I know, like I mentioned earlier, it kind of gives me a good kickoff to the day. For you, Amanda, it's a nice way to close out the day. It's going to depend on the person. A lot of it's just about showing up, and you figure out what works best, and you do it consistently. In the end, that's where you get the most benefit. And it might seem cliche to talk about, working out and health and doing so consistently. But the reality is, as photography business owners, in many cases anyway, probably many of those listening in are sitting much of the day, if not most of the day. And getting up, moving, it's good for not only our physical or our bodily health, but our mental health as well. And it can't be stressed enough. We need to make sure that we consistently show up, do that. It also helps minimize, for any wedding photographers, the wedding hangover. So we'll just put that out there. But let's keep going. Outsourcing, delegation. Is this something that you've incorporated into your business? And if so, what does that look like? If not, talk to us about why not.
I'm slightly terrible at it.
I appreciate the transparency.
The only thing that I really hate doing that I've outsourced is album design. But I don't do a ton of albums. So that's not a huge outsource for me.
That's fair. So, but just talk to us. And I love, by the way, there's not really a wrong answer here. It makes for great conversation either way. Talk to us about why you have apprehension about outsourcing, about delegating. Why have you held on to most of that?
I'm not diagnosed OCD, but I'm pretty OCD about certain aspects.
Okay.
And I know somebody could probably match what I'm doing. It's just a control thing. I think over my work and my name on what I'm putting out.
Sure.
The other thing is sometimes I don't have time to outsource. Like with the Empire State Building, their turnaround time is an hour or less, ideally. So that I do pretty much on site. I've jumped into like a Dunkin' Donuts or whatever's around that has decent Wi-Fi with my laptop and just knock it out right after the shoot.
Well, and you know what? You mentioned the Empire State Building, so let's just give a little bit more context to our listeners too. Talk to us, just sum up briefly the type of photography or photographic services that you offer so that our listeners understand what you're referencing.
For just the Empire State Building, or?
Let's go ahead and mention all of the above, because I know you're not just there.
Oh, geez. No, yeah. I'm super varied. For the Empire State Building, it is media, like celebrity and athlete photo ops. So when anybody comes to the building on a press tour or anything like that, I cover it for the building itself.
Okay.
For them to use for PR and whatever.
Yeah, you mentioned you photographed
sources.
Mariah Carey too, didn't you?
I did, yeah, this past December.
That's pretty cool.
It was intense, but it was cool. And she was on time, which was nice. But yeah, and then my other big client is the New York Jets for the NFL. I focus there on activation, so branding, and then also the flight crew, which are the cheerleaders.
Very cool. Okay, so is that where you're spending those two venues, if you will, are where you're spending the majority of your time as a photographer?
Yeah, for the most part, yep.
Very cool. Okay, and of course, we're going to give further context to that when we talk about lighting here in just a little bit. But when you talked about the Empire State Building, that at least gives our listeners a little bit of context to what you're referencing there. And I have to say, by the way, I mean, despite your apprehension about outsourcing or delegating your editing or anything else, your work is quite beautiful. It's quite vibrant. For anybody that's curious to take a look, if you go to Instagram, just fire the Canon, just like it sounds.
Canon spelled like the camera, not the weapon.
By the way, yeah, Canon, correct. You'll be able to see this work, and it's widely varied and extremely vibrant. It's really, really lovely. I'm just kind of scrolling through here, and the colors just jump off the page. But yeah, definitely check that out. Of course, we'll put these in the show notes, the website and Instagram in the show notes. But talk to me about inspiration, education, and to kind of break the fourth wall. I was talking with Amanda about this before we started. Amanda, you said that you're not so much into the books and the podcasts. You actually found a lot of inspiration in a particular Facebook group. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, a couple of Facebook groups. So I'm in New York City. There's localized groups, but then I also, with Flash, use a lot of the MagMod products.
Okay.
So MagMod has a specific group for their community of people that use their products to post photos and then talk about how they were shot. So I get some inspiration from that. I also try not to plan too much going into some of my shoots and just kind of let things serendipitously happen as far as locations, or it depends on who I'm shooting too. So if I'm working with a dancer I let whatever poses they want to do kind of dictate where I shoot or what I shoot, and I bounce off of them.
So then you're kind of learning as you go, because they're
100%.
They're setting the shot up, so you're kind of forced to make that particular shot happen.
100%. Yep.
Interesting. Wow. I mean, that's a bit of a risky move. Have you ever run into situations that ended up being problematic, or do you just always make it work?
I usually make it work. I run into some issues with security guards that are overzealous. So I mentioned I used a Canon 600 speed lights. I had a problem actually in Vegas during WPPI. We were shooting on a parking garage rooftop, and there was so much interference with the flashes that I was having dancers like jump, and then my flashes weren't firing. But luckily everybody was patient, and it was just like a fun shoot that we kept going, and they used it as practice. But that's really the only issues I've ever had.
Really? Wow. Well, I mean, kudos to you for being creative and resourceful. And to your earlier point too, it is great to have at least one community that you can go to, get into conversation with about any and everything related to running your business, but also, of course, get some type of education from that group. I mean, I was a part of, back before Facebook groups were really a thing, it was, of course, the online forums. And there was a particular forum that myself and my business partner were a big part of. And there were the relationships developed as a result of that forum. There certainly was the education or the inspiration. There was an opportunity to share with others. It was just a really great place to be. And as much as I have ranted here, even on the podcast, about the importance of actually connecting with people in person, there's definitely significant value through virtual connection or via virtual connection. Especially when you're stuck at home and you don't actually have a choice to go anywhere. So anybody listening in, make sure you've at least found one group online where there's significant value and the people are positive and helpful, not kissing your butt, to be clear, because that happens too. You see that sometimes in Facebook groups, but people that will not only be kind, but also be willing to give you that honest, constructive criticism. And that's really important. But let's just jump right into the topic here, because it's a loaded one. And to be clear, we're just going to kind of cover some basics today, almost like an introduction to off-camera lighting from somebody, by the way, who has a ton of experience. So this is kind of cool. But let's just start with where you learned off-camera lighting to begin with. And you know what? Actually, before we do that, Amanda, we just briefly summarize or define really what off-camera lighting is for somebody who's kind of brand new to photography.
I mean, in the simplest of terms, off-camera lighting is taking the flash from on your hot shoe on your camera to putting it on a light stand, even if it was right next to you.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, that's great. And I love simple. So that's a great simple definition. What that ultimately translates to when it comes to a portrait session, we'll get into in more detail in a second. But how did you go about learning off-camera lighting technique? So
even before just off camera, I started taking photography classes in 6th grade and went through college with it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I've kind of known this was my path for a very long time. But off camera specifically, I assisted at studios during like shootouts and workshops. A lot of experimenting. What happens if I do this? Oh no, that's terrible. Let me move it somewhere else kind of thing.
So just a combination then of education in school and then experimentation then.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, and of course the wonders of digital photography is that you can do so freely and easily. And I mean, this is, I don't want to get too caught up in a tangent, but this is also why there is so much competition now, because it's relatively easy to learn even something seemingly daunting maybe as off-camera lighting, because all you have to do is take some pictures, make adjustments to settings and the position of the camera or the flash, and you can learn as you go in a relatively short amount of time.
And it's immediate versus waiting for it to come back from a darkroom or spending hours in a dark room.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Which, I certainly don't want to complain.
Which I miss completely. But
do you? Oh, well, I was going to say, I did the same. I went through the same thing because I shot film early in my career. How long did you shoot film?
Oh, man. I mean, I graduated high school in 2005 and I graduated college in 2009.
Okay.
And I would say college is probably where I stopped, because that was when I got my first digital. It's like, or I got it as a high school graduation present. It was a Canon 20D.
Yep.
But since then, I really hadn't shot film unless it was like a school project.
Well, that was about 2005 was about the time that we switched in our business from film to digital, or we're beginning to make the switch anyway. Got that first. It was a Nikon D1X actually at the time, mm-hmm. But it was, man. That, of course, the stories that go along with that. Like our local lab didn't really know how to print digital files and get the skin tones right, and so you had these weird plasticky looking skin tones, and It was quite the adventure, shall we say. But let's keep going to gear, specifically your flash, the flash of choice for you. Which one is that?
The Canon 600s.
Okay. And I know that in recent years, and I've had personal experience with at least one brand as well, some of these kind of cheaper $100, $150 flashes that you can buy off Amazon have become really, really popular. What are the advantages that you see in the Canon specific product, which is obviously much more expensive, over some of these other cheaper solutions that a lot of photographers would say, oh no, it's just as good or almost as good? Like, what's the comparison and contrast there?
Honestly, I just like having consistency.
Okay.
And I'm a Canon CPS member, the professional services. So I know as a platinum member that if anything ever breaks, it's a 1-day turnaround.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I don't, obviously with like the other brands, I know Godox is super popular and there's one other that I can't think of right now, but those don't have the customer experience that going directly with the Canon has had for me.
Well, and one of the things that I noticed, because I had a set of, I don't think it was Godox. I think it was, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but is it Young Niao? It's maybe a Chinese
Young
brand.
Nuo, something.
Young Nuo,
Yep,
something
that's
like
the
that.
other one I was thinking of. Yep.
Right. So the flashes themselves actually worked quite well.
I know a lot of people that use them. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Godox too.
They even have remote functionality, which is pretty cool. But the thing that was missing for me from those flashes was the infrared autofocus assist, which when it came time for the reception lighting, or a lack of light, shall we say? Oh my goodness, it was a nightmare to shoot with those. And I don't know, maybe they make versions from those brands that actually have that autofocus assist, but that was one of the major things that was missing. Because during my career, and I say this, I shot someone's wedding, I don't know, a couple of years ago, a family member's wedding, and I picked up, I think 2 flashes and photographed that, and had kind of a nightmare of experience in that low lighting scenario. When I was shooting full time with an active business, I was using Nikon flashes, and man, it was so nice. You could literally hold the camera above your head, with a wide angle lens on, and just pop, 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 and you get these really, really cool photos that were tack sharp because of that autofocus assist. So it was really, really great. What would you say are the biggest reasons that aside from consistency though, like on a technical or practical application level, why do you like the Canon camera, or Canon flashes rather, so much?
Well, the 600s are radio.
Okay.
I used to have the 580s, which were infrared.
Okay.
So those are line of sight, which if I don't do a ton of weddings, but I do some. If you're not directly looking or in back of that flash, they're not going to fire. With radio, they can literally be behind walls and still fire. And
just to give context for listeners who aren't familiar with how these flashes might work, we're talking about the ability for the camera to communicate with the flash, or vice versa, right?
Correct, yeah.
So if you move that
flash to flash, yeah.
Or flash to flash, correct. So if you move that camera or the flash off the camera, you need those lights to be able to communicate with each other, potentially even the camera to communicate with the light. And so when you're talking about infrared versus radio, that's the distinction there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And also size. I like the size of the Canon 600s. I do a decent amount of travel, even within Manhattan, where I either have to take an Uber or walk. I don't do subways. I'm a bad New Yorker. I carry 4 of them with me almost all the time.
Wow.
And they don't take up much space at all.
How are they for battery life?
I use rechargeable batteries.
Okay.
By a company called Maha, M-A-H-A. They're PowerX batteries. They're phenomenal. I shoot, to go back to the Empire State Building, there I really only use on camera just because of space, but I'm shooting full power for half an hour and I have no problems.
No issues. Yeah, I noticed that with recharging, and do you we'll probably get into the technical side of this in a second, but are you shooting those in a manual mode or an automatic mode?
Mostly manual.
Manual, yeah. So I similarly, I noticed using the combination of a manual setting with rechargeable batteries, we could shoot in some cases for a whole reception with just one set of batteries on one of these off-camera
easily.
Nikons. It was amazing.
Easily, yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd love portability, simplicity, especially when you're traveling, you're moving around quite a bit. So that's really encouraging to know. And we'll link to some on Amazon. Haley will put those in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. By the way, if anybody listening in, not only do we have show notes at bokehpodcast.com, but Haley's put together really great kind of package of resources there, because now we have something like 350 episodes on air. There's a lot of content. She makes it a little bit easier to be able to sort through all of that. So take advantage for sure. The show notes will have the resources and links from today in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But let's get into the technical side of things, and I want to make it easy particularly for somebody who's not either spent a lot of time with off-camera lighting or has never attempted any kind of OCF for short. I want to make it easy for them to get started. So you and I chatted actually before we started recording. You shared, we ultimately had 5 different kind of main points that we want to hit here. The first thing that you mentioned to me was the significance of knowing the equipment. Now, that might seem obvious to some listening in, but I remember specifically shooting, I shot with a Nikon camera or cameras over the years, and I got to know that equipment so well that, I can even, if I close my eyes, even I can feel that camera in my hand right now, even though I don't have one anymore, because I knew it so well. You become so intimately acquainted with the functionality, the layout of that machine that you can almost use it in your sleep. So that's kind of what I liken to this notion of knowing the equipment. First of all, how long did it take you to become familiar with that Canon flash, and what did that process look like?
I'm still learning things about it.
Are you? Okay.
If I'm being honest. Yeah, I've had them, I want to say like 5 years now, I think. I know they've put out a new version. They put out the 600 like EXR2 or something like that.
Okay.
But I still have the main, like the first initial version of it. And honestly haven't found any reason to upgrade. It's, I started off with ETTL, which is electronic through the lens, and letting the camera choose my settings for me.
Okay.
Especially in receptions. Sometimes I'll still do that, but that's not how, I didn't learn anything from that. And I think photographers are inherently curious. So artists in general are inherently curious and risk takers to some extent. So I take it to manual when I felt safe enough, or when I wasn't on a client's budget and I was just doing my own thing to learn what half power versus full power look like, or even going down lower, or just trying things out there.
So with ETTL, were you simultaneously setting the camera on like an aperture priority or program, or were you putting that on manual? What did the camera setup look like in conjunction? My camera
is manual 100%. I have had zero luck on aperture priority. Okay, I don't know if it's me. I'm a natural blonde. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's the camera, but I've never had luck on aperture priority.
Oh no! The fact that you're going with full manual would suggest that your intelligence is actually quite high. To be able to do that on the fly, to make the adjustments as you need it, quickly check settings or the result that you're getting, make an adjustment, and keep going. That takes more thought and effort than just putting it in aperture priority. So props to you for that. But just to give context to our listeners, though, so with ETTL, you still had your camera on manual setting. You've
Correct.
got the flash doing the work for you. At what point did you begin to transition away from that and start to use the manual settings?
When I got bored.
Fair. So are you experimenting like outside of a job or on site at a job?
I'll say I've done both, but I don't recommend doing it on a job.
Sure.
Receptions are 4 to 5 hours long. And if you have a really good dancing crowd, you can get what you need in the first hour and just get all the safe shots and then start to experiment. You don't necessarily have to show your client what you experiment, as long as you have the shots, enough shots to make an album look good or make them look good. But that's also, I love working with, I mentioned to you, I don't know if I mentioned it already on this, but I love working with dancers. Dancers are creative. They kind of force you to, not to use Apple's slogan, but think differently than maybe you would look at a situation otherwise. And just having other photographer friends to bounce ideas off of too helps.
Yeah, it's easy to find inspiration, I guess, just by, you can start in the Facebook groups like we were talking about earlier. You can go to Instagram, look at other photographers' work.
Instagram is all inspiration for the most part. Look up at certain hashtags. Even if you did hashtag like OCF, I'm sure things would come up.
Oh, yeah, I bet. And then figuring out, taking the time to actually figure out, okay, I love this image. I love what's going on here. I'm going to try to figure out how to make that work. If need be, you can DM the photographer, but otherwise experimenting a little bit, taking the time to experiment really makes a difference. I mean, watching a YouTube video, okay. Reading a book, sure, maybe a little bit, but actually hands-on, setting the lights up and taking the time to practice is just, I mean, it might seem obvious, but I don't think the photographers do it enough. They get so caught up, especially after they start shooting, just going from one shoot to the next and not really doing a whole lot in between. I think it's a great recommendation, suggestion that we all put some type of practice in, myself included.
And as I say, you hear so many professional photographers say don't shoot for free. And I hate that. Like, I'm so against that. I shoot for free all the time because that's how I learn. I wouldn't have gotten my gig with the Empire State Building if I didn't shoot for free, because I did 2 events for social media for somebody else that got me up there before they started asking me my rates. And it's networking. I know you're big on networking as well. I'm huge on networking, and a lot of it is who you know.
It's really true. And I mean, to your point about being willing to shoot for free, you got to set your ego aside and look at it as an opportunity versus, this notion that it's going to somehow devalue your brand, that you occasionally do something for the sake of practice or just adding value to somebody else's life or another business. It's going to come back in a positive way at some point. You just have to trust that. So 100%. We'll start by suggesting that those listening in, I mean, if you're new to off-camera flash, make sure that you have a good feel for the equipment. And as basic as it might sound, a lot of that just comes from practice, using it, practicing, seeing the results, making adjustments, keep going.
Never show up to a paid gig with new equipment. It's just a recipe for you to fail.
Yes, for sure. Start by knowing your equipment. The second thing that you mentioned to me was the importance of knowing where the secondary light source is. So now we're going to start getting a little bit technical for anybody that's new to off-camera lighting. Can you explain to our listeners what this means?
So for me, the secondary light source is the sun. Or if I'm shooting at night, it's lights from a business, or it's anything that's not my flash.
Okay.
So I tend to break all the rules per se and put the sun directly behind my subject where I'm shooting into it, which my camera doesn't always like to focus, but it also creates a nice rim light without me having to set up multiple flashes. I'm very simple and I like one flash, and especially in New York City, you don't have the space or necessarily the time to set up 2, 3, 4 flashes on location. So the secondary light source is usually the sun for me.
Okay. And then as I'm scrolling through your Instagram account here, I'm not seeing a lot with sun flare, for example, in it. Are you shooting directly into the sun? Are you putting that sun at a particular degree angle? How are you placing it, or how are you setting your subject, I guess, in regards to where the sun is?
There's no one way, which kind of makes answering that a little complicated. It really depends on time of day and the effect that I want. I don't get a lot of sun flare, and I think maybe because the flash kills it, but you can also, I don't know, you can change your angle. So if I'm down shooting up towards the sun, you're probably going to get more sun flare than shooting straight and where the sun's coming down onto the subject, if that makes sense.
Well, I mean, ultimately we can make adjustments as necessary, right? If you see that sun or that flare coming in, but you're saying that as far as where you normally place that so-called secondary light, the sun or lights coming off the building, it's just going to vary depending on the situation, the subject that you're working with?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. But you're ultimately using those as a way to create a little bit of separation from the background, a rim light, as you mentioned earlier. I love using, especially at sunset when I used to photograph engagement sessions or even the couples at the weddings, having that beautiful, soft, warm rim light is really, really nice. But is that kind of the purpose of that, is to create the separation, a little bit of depth in the image?
Yep, exactly. I tend to shoot everything wide open or with a very fast aperture.
Okay.
So all of my lenses are 2.8 or faster. Obviously, if it's a group of 8, I'm not going to shoot at 2.8. But most of the time, if it's 1 or 2 people, I'm at 1.2, 1.4, somewhere around there to also create the separation.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So that additional effect is really nice. In fact, I'm actually looking at a picture here. This is an image that you posted back. Oh, wow. It's been a year and 3 months or 4 months ago, December 22nd, 2018. I scrolled down a little ways.
Scrolled way far.
But this is a couple standing in front of, he's actually kind of dipping her and there's some what looks like Christmas lights in the background, and you've created a separation, quite a bit of separation with that shallow depth of field, which is really nice. But those lights also, it looks like, act as a little bit of a rim light. So it played beautifully both ways. That's really cool.
Is she in a red skirt?
She is, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know which image you're talking about. So that is on the street. I want to say it's like 55th Street in Manhattan. But every holiday time, every December, November, they just throw random lights up. So it's like this kind of really cool, unorganized but organized look to it. So part of that separation too is the lens that I was using. I was using the 70 to 200.
Okay.
So that, without getting super technical, compresses the background to look like it's closer than it is to the subject.
Right.
And then there's also lights from cars that are behind them, which is my secondary light.
Yeah, well, you kind of have almost like a tertiary light too. You've got the light from the car, and then you have those lights in the background. And then, of course, you've got your main light, which is a good segue to the third point, which is the positioning of the main light. You've got to position the secondary light, and I put position in air quotes there. Sometimes you can't actually control it, so you have to shift accordingly. But then positioning the main light, what does that look like for you? Are you always trying to create a certain direction at an angle across your subject? Are you sometimes just front lighting them? Does it vary? What does that process look like?
So this is going to sound kind of ironic, but I hate images that look like flash, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely.
I don't like that direct flash kind of look. So I'm always trying to soften it, create that more like dynamic portrait or look to it. So if it's two people, if it's a couple, the light is always to flatter the female. If it's a same-sex couple, you just have to do your best for whoever, for both of them. But if it's a bride and groom, I always focus on the bride. Make the bride look good.
And that picture that we were referencing from December 22nd, 2018, we'll try to link to this in the show notes for reference for anybody listening in. But you definitely soften the light there. I mean, the balance between the foreground light and the background light is quite lovely.
Thank you. So that it was one flash. I think my light stand is 8 feet tall. So it was all the way up, and with the Magmod sphere. So it did have a softening like dome to it.
Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about modifiers here in just a little bit, but I can also see that the shadow from the couple is being cast, I mean, me looking at them to the back and left of them. So you can tell that you're actually shooting across, a little bit of angle, a little bit of direction to the light.
Always.
Do you tend to do that? Okay.
Always, yeah. Never straight on, always at an angle and down.
And you mentioned it being at 8 feet. Do you usually bump that light up higher than the subject? And what's the thought process behind that?
Yeah, higher and then aimed down towards them. I've just found it's the most flattering. It doesn't create weird shadows on noses if it's the same level and at an angle, which of course you can do if you want to be more dramatic. But it just seems to spread it out and be the most flattering.
Well, closely tied to, and we're going to keep referencing this image because I think it's a good reference image, but closely tied to the position of the main light then is also the position of the subject. They can almost go hand in hand. We might even prioritize one or the other, but positioning the subject in reference to the light. You've already kind of alluded to this, but do you have anything that you want to add for the sake of conversation? I mean, especially looking at that one image of the couple, the woman with the red skirt.
Don't play in traffic unless you know what you're doing.
So don't do what's in that picture.
So in this case, it's a one-way street and I am facing the oncoming traffic, which is if you're going to go into a street and it's one way, make sure that you as a photographer are watching because you don't want your couple to have that in the back of their mind while they're posing, to also be aware of like, stop, there's a car coming.
Yeah.
So that's all in my control as well.
But from a technical standpoint, though, I mean, is there something that our listeners, especially if they're new to using lights off camera, is there something that they should consider technically when it comes to positioning the subject as it relates to where the light is? I
always recommend high, aim down. So it's as high as your light stand can go, and then aim towards the couple or person.
But just not going too high, because if you go too high, you mentioned earlier, it can cast some kind of weird shadows on the nose. So this is not going a whole lot higher than their natural height, correct?
No, I would say it's about 2 feet higher.
Okay.
And then back about 5 or 6 feet.
Very cool. I'm trying to can pull different ideas and points and suggestions out of this, but I think one of the wonderful things about this conversation, especially the way that you are implementing it and what we're presenting here, ultimately, it's actually quite simple as an idea. You need to get out, for those of you listening, you need to get out and practice with these very simple ideas. But at the end, they're not overly complicated. So I know that there have been some photographers that have avoided, at least for a time anyway, and maybe still are avoiding experimenting with off-camera lights because they're intimidated by the idea. But the reality is the basic principles aren't overly complicated to implement. You do have a digital camera with a screen that's going to immediately tell you whether or not it worked, and you can make adjustments and experiment. It wouldn't hurt to call one of your clients up and say, hey, I want to put together this shoot. No cost to you. Would you be willing? And then you experiment with that. And tell them it's going to take a couple hours, and you're going to set up a variety of shots. They're going to get some free pictures from it, and you get some great practice.
That's exactly what I did with this couple. So she is a New York Jets cheerleader.
Oh, cool.
And had just gotten engaged. So I was like, is your new fiance down to shoot? Here's the street. Here's what it looks like. I have no idea what is actually going to look good, but yeah, I can promise you're going to get at least like 5 pictures that you're going to like.
Brilliant. Well, there you go. I'm loving this picture even more. We're just going to use it for everything. Just in closing, though, you alluded earlier to modifiers, especially in the context of softening the image. You also alluded to MagMod. I know that you're a fan. Talk to us about what modifiers and gels you're using and how our listeners can begin to do the same.
So gels, if you're just starting out, I wouldn't focus on because those can get overly complicated. But if you're, I love the, my main modifier is a mag sphere, the MagMod sphere. It's just easy. It's magnets. It folds, it bends. It can crush it into my camera bag and it'll still retain shape when I pull it out. And it's small. It's a great light source. It just softens everything. The other one I use is when I have more time or space is their softbox, the mag box.
Okay.
It's like a 30-second installation.
Wow.
And if you're like me and hate the sound of Velcro, or in churches and you can't have Velcro,
True.
The magnets are just satisfying.
You're so right, though.
That's word.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you say that because I used to use a modifier I was a huge fan of, actually, that did go on with Velcro. And man,
it's the worst.
It is the worst for sure.
It's like nails on a chalkboard.
Yeah.
That's another tangent. But they also have I forget what they call it, but it goes on your light stand and it holds 2 flashes.
Okay. Which
I now use often because if I'm shooting into the sun, I need to overpower the sun. And while 1 flash at full power can do that, 2 flashes at half power will recycle faster.
Sure.
And get the same effect. And so I miss less and use less battery, like we were talking earlier.
So I'm looking here at products really quick from MagMod. Is it the MagMod Mag Ring, Speed Ring?
Yes, I believe it is.
That holds the 2 flashes? Okay.
Yeah.
If not, either way, what we'll do is make sure to link to that in the show notes, just for everybody in case
it comes with the softbox. So that's how I got it. But you can use it without any modifier as well.
Yeah, I think that's it. So you got that mag box, and then the ring is a mounting system for
mag ring,
for the box, and you can put 2 flashes in there. Wow.
Yep.
Huh. Okay. Well, nonetheless, we'll make sure that we have the right products linked to in the show notes. And shout out to MagMod. This is definitely not a sponsored episode, but
no, but now they should.
Maybe they should. Yeah, absolutely. That's hilarious. Just really quick in closing, though, you said gels is not a great place to go when you're first getting started. Can you just share briefly how you might use them now, or if you do, and what the benefit of them is?
I don't use a ton, but when I do, it's more color corrective. So I will use like a blue gel on my flash if I want to warm up an image. So basically it's doing the opposite. You use the warmer, like the CTO, the color temperature orange gels to make an image cooler. And it's just to match other light sources around. So I shoot a lot on like cloudy days or like bright sunny days. There's really no in between. So if it's a cloudy day, I'll probably want to warm up the image a bit. And if I use the blue gel, it'll help me do that. And then the other way they do, if you use colors, get creative, put it in the background. If you want to change a red brick wall to being purple or green, that would take an extra flash that you can put it on and then just aim that at the wall and change the whole dynamic of the picture, essentially.
Yeah, start getting a little bit creative, a little crazy.
Yeah. I like crazy.
No, that's really good. That's really good. Well, I really appreciate you sharing just kind of an introduction to off-camera flash, and ultimately, I mean, an implementation of the technique that could be used for the foreseeable future for a photographer too. It doesn't have to be complicated. That's one of the things I love about life is, and I find quite hilarious at times, is how complicated that we as human beings tend to make things when in many cases it's just not necessary. This has been a really great introduction to a simple way to approach off-camera light. And for anybody who is curious, can you just remind them, if they want to follow what you're doing, maybe even send a question or two your way, where can they find you online, your website, and Instagram again?
All of my social media and website are the same. It's Fire the Canon. Canon spelled like the camera, Canon.
Perfect. And we'll link to those
again,
in the show notes. Yeah, no, that's the way to go. Show notes, bokehpodcast.com. Thanks once again, Amanda, for hanging out with us today.
Absolutely. It's been fun.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.